The firing range on Cadet Station Kelvith 3 was 300 meters long, climate-controlled to a standard atmosphere of 1.1 bar, and lit with the flat white lighting that made everyone look slightly unwell regardless of species. It was Emma's favorite place on the station. She was there an hour before mandatory range time every morning. She was there an hour after it every evening. On rest days, when the range was technically closed, she had found that the night duty officer, a bored Karathi named Des who was working through a personal study program and did not particularly care what cadets did as long as they signed the equipment log, would leave the side door on a latch. Emma signed the log. Emma used the side door. She had been doing this for 6 weeks. The Kelvith 3 marksmanship program was built around the Coalition's standard sidearm, a weapon designed by committee across 9 species over 20 years, which meant it was technically functional for all of them and perfectly optimized for none. The grip was sized for Marathai hands, the trigger weight calibrated for Velk finger pressure norms, and the sight alignment assumed an Ida barrel geometry that worked best for Telesi height. For a human, shooting it correctly by Coalition doctrine was like writing with someone else's hand. The doctrine specified a 2-handed grip, dominant hand wrapped over support hand, barrel wrist alignment at precisely 17 degrees above horizontal to compensate for the Coalition standard's particular recoil pattern. Emma did not shoot it that way. She had tried. For the first week, she had followed the doctrine exactly, and her groupings had been adequate, within the passing threshold, nothing more. Then one evening, alone on the range with the side door latched behind her, she had let her hands find what felt natural, and she had shot 3 magazines without thinking about doctrine at all. Her groupings had been extraordinary. She'd looked at the target for a long time. Then she'd looked at her hands. Then she'd gone back to the barracks and read everything she could find about human ballistic history, which turned out to be extensive, complicated, and somewhat alarming to the xenobiological researchers who had compiled it. After that, she stopped trying to shoot the Coalition way. Jack noticed on a Tuesday. He was Velk, broad-plated, unhurried, with the particular patience of a species that had been apex predators on their homeworld for 3 million years and had not entirely forgotten it. He was also, by general consensus, the best shot in the current cadet cohort. His groupings were machine-precise, his doctrine form immaculate, and he had made clear in the polite but absolute way of Velk's social communication that he considered marksmanship a serious discipline that deserved serious practitioners. He was on the range during a free session when Emma arrived and took the lane beside him. He watched her set up. She stood slightly closer to the line than doctrine suggested. Her feet were at an angle he didn't recognize from any Coalition training manual. When she raised the weapon, her dominant elbow dropped below the standard position, and her support hand wrapped differently. Thumb angled, wrist rotated, the whole structure of the grip just slightly wrong by every metric Jack had been taught. He said nothing during the first magazine. During the second, he said, "Your form is incorrect." Emma fired. Center mass, center mass, center mass, a pattern so tight it was almost a single hole. I know. The Coalition standard grip exists for a reason. It accounts for the weapon's recoil geometry. Another magazine. The same result. Jack's plating shifted, the Velk equivalent of a frown. You're compensating incorrectly. It will fail at distance. Emma set down the weapon, pressed the target retrieval, and showed him the grouping. 22 rounds. The spread at center mass was smaller than his thumbplate. "What distance would you like to try?" she asked. Word moved the way it always moved in cadet cohorts, fast, sideways, and slightly distorted by the time it arrived. By Thursday, half the range section had heard that the human cadet was shooting with bad form and somehow not missing, which was either a fluke or a problem depending on who you asked. By Friday, they had started calling it the drift grip, not kindly. It became a joke with a specific structure. Someone would mime Emma's stance, exaggerating the dropped elbow and the angled thumb, and then mime a shot going wildly wrong. It was the kind of joke that wasn't quite bullying and wasn't quite harmless. Emma heard it. She had good ears. Humans generally did. A legacy of prey-animal ancestry that the xenobiologists also found interesting. And the range common area had the acoustic properties of a stone bowl. She didn't respond to it. She went to the side door instead. Master Instructor Venn had been running the marksmanship program at Kelvith 3 for 19 years. Me was Telesi, old enough that the joints showed it. careful in movement in the way of someone who had learned to conserve. Me had trained 11 cohorts of cadets, produced 4 coalition marksmanship champions, and written 2 of the supplementary manuals that the coalition standard curriculum referenced. Me had also, 19 years ago, trained alongside a human soldier for 8 months during a joint forces exchange program. Me had never forgotten it. On Friday evening, Vin walked the range during free session. This was not unusual. Vin walked the range most evenings, checking form, correcting grip, offering the quiet, precise feedback that distinguished instruction from criticism. Me stopped at Emma's lane. Me watched for one full magazine without speaking. Emma was aware of the instructor. She kept shooting. Center mass, edge of the secondary ring because she'd moved to the 200-meter setting and was still calibrating the sight adjustment, center mass again. Vin said nothing until the magazine was empty. Then me said, very quietly enough that only Emma could hear, "Where did you learn that grip?" "I didn't," Emma said. "I just stopped using the other one." "Show me your hands." Emma set down the weapon and held out her hands, palms up. Vin examined them with the focused attention of someone reading a document. Human hands were unusual by coalition standards. The thumb's range of opposition, the density of mechanoreceptors in the fingertips, the specific ratio of palm width to finger length, all of it had evolved over hundreds of thousands of years of tool use on a high-gravity, high-consequence world where the difference between a grip that held and a grip that slipped was sometimes the difference between eating and not eating. "Your proprioception," Vin said, "is finer than the doctrine accounts for. The standard grip was not designed for hands like yours." I figured something like that. The angle you're using, the dropped elbow, the thumb rotation, it's not wrong. It's a different solution to the same problem. One that works with your hand structure rather than against it. Emma looked at the instructor. "Is that what the joke is about? That my solution looks wrong because it's for different hands?" Vin was quiet for a moment. "Yes," me said. "That is exactly what the joke is about." A pause. "They are not wrong that your form is non-standard. They are wrong about what that means." The formal assessment was on Monday. The cohort, 64 cadets from 19 species, rotated through the range in groups of 8. Each cadet fired 3 magazines at 3 distances: 50 meters, 150 meters, and 250 meters. Scores were tallied and ranked publicly, which was a coalition training tradition that other coalition traditions about unit cohesion quietly contradicted but had never managed to eliminate. Jack shot first in Emma's group. His form was perfect, truly perfect, the kind of precision that came from 1,000 repetitions ingraining doctrine into muscle memory. His groupings at all 3 distances were excellent. The cohort watched and made the sounds of genuine appreciation because Jack genuinely deserved them. Emma shot last. She stepped into the lane, and there was a ripple of the specific quiet that meant people were deciding whether to watch seriously or perform not watching. She heard someone near the back make the drift grip gesture. She set her feet. She found her angle. She raised the weapon and let her hands do what they had learned over 6 weeks of side door evenings. And before that, a lifetime on a planet where humans had been shooting things for 200,000 years and had developed opinions about how to do it. At 50 meters, her grouping was tighter than Jack's. At 150 meters, it was tighter still. At 250 meters, the distance where the coalition standards recoil geometry became most punishing, where doctrine form was most critical, where the dropped elbow grip should theoretically have cost her the most, she shot the best grouping of the day. The range was silent. Then Master Instructor Vin, who had been standing at the scorer's position, spoke. Not quietly this time, not privately, but in the carrying tone of someone making an official observation. Non-standard form. Outstanding result. Note for the record, the coalition standard grip represents an optimized solution for coalition average hand morphology. It is not the only solution. It is not the best solution for every species. A pause. Cadets are advised to learn doctrine thoroughly enough to understand why it exists, and to recognize when their own biology offers a better answer. Me closed the scoring tablet. Cadet Emma leads the cohort. "Next group, please." Jack found her afterward in the common area. He stood for a moment in the Velp posture that meant me had something to say and was choosing the words with care. "Your elbow position," he said finally. "The drop. I want to understand the mechanics." Emma looked at him. Not the question she'd expected. "It's about the thumb," she said. If I rotate the thumb to that angle, the elbow has to drop to keep the wrist aligned. It feels wrong by doctrine, but it gives me a more stable platform because of how my palm sits on the grip. Jack was quiet, processing. Your species has unusual hands. We held a lot of things for a very long time, Emma said. Evolution had opinions. Would you show me? Not to replicate. I cannot replicate it. My hand structure is different. But to understand. Emma considered him. The same cadet who had told her, 6 days ago, that her form was incorrect. Saying it not to diminish her, but because he had genuinely believed it. And who was now standing here asking to learn. That was the thing about Jack, she was realizing. Me was competitive in the way of someone who took the subject seriously, not in the way of someone who needed to win. Sure, she said. Come to the range tonight. I know which door is open. They were there until the station's lights cycled to dim. Emma showed him the grip, the angle, the reasoning behind it. Jack couldn't replicate it. His plates and the different geometry of Velk fingers made the exact form impossible. But me understood it, and understanding it made me shoot better because me stopped trying to force a grip that his own hand structure was quietly fighting. They talked about hands for a while. Then about weapons. Then about the history of both, which turned out to be a long conversation because humans had a lot of history with weapons and Velk had a lot of history with weapons, and the overlap was interesting in the way that two long rivers running in parallel were interesting. The night duty Karathi, Des, passed through once and looked at them and said nothing. The equipment log showed 2 names and a timeout. That was sufficient. At some point Emma said, "You started the drift grip thing." Jack was quiet for a beat. "I said your form was incorrect. I did not intend it to become a..." "I know," Emma said. "I'm not angry. I just wanted you to know I noticed." Another beat. "I was wrong about your form. You were right that it was non-standard. That is not the same as wrong." "No," Emma agreed. "It's not." Venn filed a supplementary note to the Coalition Marksmanship Curriculum Review Board that cycle. It was 4 paragraphs long, dry in the way of official documentation, and recommended that the standard grip assessment rubric include a notation for species adaptive technique to be evaluated on outcome rather than form adherence. The board acknowledged receipt. The notation was added in the next curriculum revision 18 months later. In the remarks field, the revision credited a performance observation from Kelvith, 3. It did not name Emma. It did not need to. The instructors who ran the program knew what had prompted it, and they told their cadets, and those cadets told the ones after them. And the story moved through the program the way true stories moved. Not as legend, but as useful information, passed from hand to hand, which was perhaps the most human way for anything to travel. They had laughed at the grip. They had not known what 200,000 years of human hands remembered. But the target knew. The target always knew.